So this is our second to last climate change advocacy boot camp, which is crazy. We've done, I think, six of these so far. This is the sixth?
Yeah, this is the sixth one.
Amazing. So we got a fun little quiz from one of our regular volunteers, Dara and Becca, and they sent us a New York Times quiz that kind of has some interesting questions and kind of allows us to guess like how we could outweigh the kind of emissions that we put out. So I thought it would just be kind of fun if we like read some of these questions and maybe had people guess. And when you guess, like maybe, you know, introduce yourself before you make your guess, and then we can like get to know each other, feel a little bit more comfortable in the space. So I'll start with the first questions. Okay, and I'll also put this link, I emailed it all to you all, but I'll put the link in the chat just for anybody that wants to later go back and read it. Seems to have not completely linked, but that's okay. So the first question is kind of between two people. So if one person decided to go vegetarian and to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions for 1 year, and then their friend decides that they don't want to change their diet, but instead they're gonna cut down on purchasing packaged foods and instead will go just for bulk foods. So the question is, how many years would it take for your friend to save the same amount of greenhouse gases by getting bulk foods than going vegetarian? So just for anybody that's new or coming back, we're starting with this New York Times quiz. I'll put back in the chat. And it's just kind of like getting a sense for emissions and how we contribute in daily things, casual things. And this first question will just, you know, you can put it in your guess in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and shout it out. But the question is like, how many years would it take for a friend who wants to purchase bulk food instead of packaged foods to outweigh the greenhouse gas emissions of somebody that goes vegetarian for 1 year? Does that make sense?
Anybody want to guess?
Anybody want to guess? How long would it take? Somebody?
How many years? Sorry, my dog.
Becca, you can't guess. I'm so glad to see everybody here though. Thanks for being here. So 3 years? Okay, let's guess 3 years. It's a little bit more than that. It's a little bit more. Does anybody else want to throw in a guess, or should I just 10 years? Yeah. The answer is 11 years, approximately 11 years of avoiding food packaging to create the same balanced impact of going without meat for 1 year. Pretty crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid packaging, but it doesn't seem like that's really balancing out. Or maybe both is the answer. Okay, next question. So electricity hogs. Your house generates a lot of greenhouse gases, but not all the appliances and gadgets are equal. How many hours could you leave a lamp with an LED light bulb switched on to produce the same amount of greenhouse gases as a single load in a clothes dryer? So drying your clothes or leaving on an LED light bulb for how long? How long do you think?
Is it a gas dryer or electric dryer?
Good question. I think they're going for electric dryer. So how long do you have to leave on a light bulb? 2 months? That's an interesting question, because 100 hours. Yeah, because the answers are in hours. So or there's days. So it's 100 is close. it says it's about 300 hours or 13 days straight to leave on that LED bulb in order to balance the same greenhouse gas emissions as one load in a dryer. So it's like the quiz is saying like maybe goes for a clothesline. I mean, if you're in California, it's hot enough, your clothes are gonna dry real quick. All right. Next one, going on vacation. So say you're taking a one-way economy flight from New York to London. You might wanna make up for those emissions by giving up quarter-pound hamburgers. So you're giving up hamburgers. How many hamburgers would you need to give up in order to offset one flight? How many hamburgers is it gonna take? 1,000? It's less, thankfully. Any other guesses? 400? That's closer. Still less.
Oh,
I
200.
was gonna say 25. 500? So they're saying approximately 278 burgers. But that's also, it says that's the equivalent to all beef consumed by the average American for 15 months. So going without beef for about 15 months may about offset your flight, but it says the range is about from 146 to about 410. So Blake, you were pretty close. Yeah, that's a lot of burgers. It's interesting how meat and flights kind of impact our environment. Okay. Last one. So the last one's between a mid-sized car and a hybrid car. So if you were to switch to a hybrid car, how many miles could you drive while still producing the same amount of greenhouse gases as a regular gas car? So how many more miles on average can you drive? I guess we can really talk about like, what do you think, how many miles can you drive with a gas car versus how many miles can you get with a hybrid car to balance the same amount of emissions between them? 1,000. So is that 1,000 miles in the hybrid? It's not that many. It's actually a lot less. 200. Yeah, about that. So on average, you can drive about 151 miles if you were in a Toyota Camry versus a Toyota Prius, it would be like 151 miles to about 200 or 190 miles in your Prius. So just a little bit more, which is like also kind of strange because we really want to switch to, electric cars, but a hybrid isn't fully electric, right? So we're talking about something that's trading off and catching up to each other. Does anybody have any reflections on this quiz? What did you think? Did anything like really?
I'll go.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I sent this to you, I'm assuming.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. I was surprised by the first two questions, how high the numbers were. And then I guess I overshot on the second two, because I have a hybrid and I get 500 plus miles to the tank. And I was like, oh, so it's gotta be, 500 to whatever. And it's not that much more. And here I thought like, oh, I'm doing a really good job. And the plastic one, the plastic to not eating meat is shocking to me. Cause you're right. Like you think, okay, I'll just reduce the plastic but it just makes such a bigger difference to eliminate the meat side of it. And because that's really such a big contributor. So I've tried to do both. I think your answer of like, just do both if you can. So I was surprised, and it's only 4 questions and I got all of them way wrong. So it's like, and I feel like I'm knowledgeable because, you know, been coming to these sessions, was trying to research on my own. And it's like, wow, I still have a lot to learn, you know? So.
Oh, thanks, Becca. Yeah, I think it's difficult to also keep up with that and know what your emissions are and like what you're contributing to. And also these things are difficult to like to do for a lot of people, you know, like a lot of people need to eat meat and like want to eat meat. There's a lot of people that can't choose not to, you know, switch out packaging. Like it's not something that everybody can like just easily be like, oh yeah, like I'm just not gonna drive my car for a month. I mean, maybe quarantine, but like still you gotta get groceries. You know, I don't know. Anybody else have thoughts and reflections on this before we transition? Okay. I'm very thankful that all of you are here. Yeah, definitely. Thank you for saying that, Sanshala. It's like it's very like the bulk options got all plastic bagged, you know, like now you're buying your bulk in a plastic bag in the first place. So it's definitely difficult. And like buying the options, the options that you could like, you know, buying your reusable plastic bag or your reusable produce bags and things like that. It's still like you're somehow buying plastic in that it's just you're gonna use it longer.
And to add to that, Whole Foods, at least the one by me, won't let you bring your own bag anymore because of COVID. And I don't know if that's all Whole Foods. Some grocery stores you can,
Yeah.
but they automatically bag your stuff in paper, which I guess paper, we're back to that because, you know, 20 years ago, it was like, don't use paper, save the trees, use plastic. And now we're swinging the other way. So they automatically do that because of COVID. So yeah, a lot of these things that you were trying to do are disrupted because of COVID.
Yeah.
All right, well, great. Thanks so much for that. Well, Becca, for sending that icebreaker. I always love like quizzes like that where it puts it into like everyday things where you can like easily see yourself like doing those and like how that would actually really impact you. It's not like something like indirect or far away. So I think we're gonna, after that icebreaker, we're gonna get started. So just welcome everyone and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. My name's Sarah. I'm one of the co-project leaders on this. Thanks again for like making it out here, especially on Labor Day weekend. This is our 6th session in the virtual climate change boot camp, sorry. Just to remind you, this session is about rethinking renewables, the role of biomethane, hydrogen, and other energies in meeting California's climate goals. In case this is your first time volunteering with us, LA Works is a nonprofit volunteer action center that creates and implements hands-on community service projects throughout the greater Los Angeles area. We strive to empower Angelinos to address pressing social issues through volunteerism and community collaborations. Today, we are lucky enough for the first time to have 2 expert speakers instead of just one, so it's treated more like a panel. First, we have Julia Levin, who is the executive director at the Bioenergy Association of California. And we also have Sam Wade, who is the director of state regulatory affairs at Renewable Gas Coalition. So just a quick overview of today's schedule. Julia will give around a 20-minute presentation, and then Sam will do the same. And I believe we'll save Q&A for the end after so we can hear everyone, and then you can ask, like, direct your question at one, the other, or both. And following that, we'll learn the advocacy skill. And so today, the advocacy skill is using social media to gain the attention of small businesses and members in your community to raise awareness and encourage change. So I just like to remind everyone every session that this is really treated as an open discussion. So please be eager and participate, like unmute your mic, write in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable, turn your camera on if you'd like. And again, I just want to thank everyone for taking time out of your Saturday morning to be here to talk about this extremely poignant issue. And with that being said, take it away, Julia.
Hey, hi everybody, and welcome. First, I'm going to start with the logistics of hopefully sharing my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Doesn't seem, there we go. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for doing this on a Saturday. The topic of bioenergy and climate change is very near and dear to my heart. I've been working on climate change for more than 20 years. I'm an very old timer on this issue. And I'm very passionate about it. So it was a great opening quiz, Geneva. Thank you for doing that. Two things I want to say about the quiz. Number one, it's really mostly about beef. All meat has greenhouse gas emissions, but beef is like orders of magnitude worse. So even if everyone could just cut down or cut out beef, that would be a huge, huge help to the climate. And the second, which is more Sam's area of expertise, is on cars. Electric cars and hybrid electric cars still have emissions because our electricity still has emissions. And people forget that not all of our electricity is renewable yet, not by a long shot, especially in other parts of the country. So those were really good questions and a great icebreaker. All right, I am gonna try to minimize the gallery so you can actually see my slides. There we go. Okay, so I am gonna focus mostly on why bioenergy is so important for climate change. I'm also gonna touch a little bit on the benefits of bioenergy for air quality and why we need bioenergy to meet our clean energy goals as well. But the main focus, I think, of today is why bioenergy is so important for climate change. So, and there are really two different parts of that. So I'll give away the conclusion at the beginning. First of all, bioenergy is absolutely critical to meet our near-term goals, which is, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we only have 12 years left to significantly reduce climate pollution, or we face catastrophic climate changes. And the IPCC said that more than a year ago. So really, for all intents and purposes, we have about a decade left to turn this enormous Titanic ship around. There are only two things that can make any difference in that time frame, or even in the next 2 to 3 decades. And that's because carbon dioxide, the main pollutant from fossil fuel emissions, stays in the atmosphere for many decades or even centuries. So while it's really important for our long-term goals to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, it makes no difference in the next decade or two. So what are the two things that do make a difference? Reducing short-lived climate pollutants, because they don't stay in the atmosphere very long, and sequestering carbon, because it pulls carbon out of the atmosphere. And bioenergy can help with both of those. Our long-term goal of carbon neutrality also depends heavily on bioenergy, and I'll come back to that one. So let's start with the really, really urgent part of this. By far, the most urgent thing we need to do about climate change is reduce short-lived climate pollutants. And there are primarily three: methane, black carbon, and chlorofluorocarbons. In California, by far the two largest are methane and black carbon. So methane, CH4, is 72 times more damaging to the climate than carbon dioxide. It only stays in the atmosphere for a few weeks, which is why it's so important to reduce it, because it has an almost immediate benefit on the climate. And in California, 4 of the 5 largest sources come from organic waste: landfills, dairies, direct emissions from cows, and wastewater treatment. All of those can be reduced with bioenergy. Black carbon is even worse, a lot worse. Black carbon, if you think of soot or particulate matter, black carbon is 3,200 times more damaging to the climate than carbon dioxide. 3,200 times more damaging. On the upside, it only stays in the atmosphere for a few hours to a few days. And so reducing black carbon has by far the most immediate impact on the climate. In California, the vast majority of black carbon is coming from wildfire. And the second and third largest sources are open burning of agricultural waste and diesel-powered vehicles. I want to talk about wildfire for a few minutes. I think you guys in Southern California are probably getting some of the smoke from the fires. I live in the Bay Area, and we've had unhealthy air quality now for 2 solid weeks. And this seems to be the new normal every fall. It's a problem for air pollution, but it's a huge problem for climate change. Wildfire is almost certainly the single largest source of climate pollution in California now. In a bad wildfire season, which is almost every year now, wildfire emissions are greater than all of the emissions from the transportation or the electricity sector. What's equally alarming, and what the focus of this graph is about, is that wildfire emissions now exceed, they are greater than all of the reductions we have accomplished across every other sector of the economy. So this slide is based on data from 2013 to 2015. In 2015, which was the worst year on record for wildfire emissions, there were almost 23 million metric tons that year. In 2018 and 2020, they're more than double that. And we are a long way from done with the 2020 wildfire season. So the California Air Resources Board has said, we cannot achieve our climate goals in California without massively reducing the amount of wildfire, both to avoid the emissions and to put the carbon back in the soil and in the trees where it belongs. So what does this have to do with bioenergy? Well, because we've had such a massive increase in wildfire over the last decade or two, California's passed several laws and emergency orders calling for an increase in the removal not of healthy, large, old-growth trees, but of unhealthy trees. We have 150 million dead and dying trees in the Sierras due to a bark beetle epidemic and a lot of other causes. We also have more biomass in the forest because for 100 years we suppressed smaller, more natural fires. So now the state has reached an agreement with the US Forest Service to remove excess forest biomass on 1 million acres a year. California has about 33 million acres of forest cover. So it's going to take us a while, but that is a lot of material. And I cannot say strongly enough, this is not about taking out healthy, mature trees. This is not about old growth forests or clear cutting. This is mostly about taking out the understory and unhealthy trees to restore forests to what they would have been more naturally. And we have a lot of records about that. Once you remove all that biomass from the forest, you can pile it up and let it decay, which releases a lot of methane and continues to be a fire hazard, or you can pile it up and burn it, which releases a lot of air pollution and climate pollution, or you can convert it to bioenergy. This is kind of one of the most important takeaways from my talk today. The California Air Resources Board and the entire statewide Association of Local Air Districts have looked a lot at the emissions from bioenergy compared to wildfire or a controlled burn of forest or agricultural waste. And the bottom line is that bioenergy can cut particulate matter and black carbon emissions by 99% compared to an open burn. Bioenergy can cut methane and other volatile organic compounds by 95% or more, and smog forming pollution by 50% or more. So there is a massive benefit of converting biomass to energy in comparison to an open burn or a wildfire. Now I want to digress just a little bit and focus on air quality for a minute, even though I know we're mostly talking about climate change today, but the two often go hand in hand, and they definitely do with fire, both wildfire and controlled burns. So in 2013, California had what was then the worst fire in the state's history. It burned for over a week north of Yosemite called the Rim Fire. That one fire caused 7 million person days of unhealthy and hazardous air quality. Since then, we've had 7 or 8 fires that are significantly larger than the Rim Fire. The wildfire smoke is so bad now that it reaches all the way to New York and is causing tens of millions of person days of unhealthy and hazardous air quality. And if you think about it, it makes sense. When you look at the amount of smoke in the air in California right now, when you look at the plumes coming out of wildfires, it's pretty horrifying. And this is not just limited to the Sierras. I think most of you are in Los Angeles or in Southern California. This is the Skirball fire a couple years ago in the city of Los Angeles. It was so bad that it shut down the 405. UCLA had to close down, and the smoke stayed in the air for weeks. So it's not just wildfire or open burning of forest waste. California also burns a lot of our agricultural waste. We are a huge agricultural producer. Some of the largest crops are fruits, particularly stone fruits, grapes, and nuts are the 3 most valuable crops in California. They all require a lot of pruning every year. In addition, we have corn husks and stalks, we have rice straw, we have a lot of other agricultural waste. It's no longer allowed to go to landfills. And so what most farmers do is open burn it in the fall and the winter. And that is also a really large source of air pollution and climate pollution in California. Bioenergy can convert that ag waste to low carbon transportation fuels, electricity, combined heat and power. And going back to that graph I showed a little bit earlier, with a 99% reduction in particulate matter and black carbon emissions. The other link between bioenergy and air quality, which I think Sam will talk about more and is much more of an expert in, is transportation emissions. In the two dirtiest air districts in the country, which is the Los Angeles Basin and the Central Valley, diesel-powered trucks are the largest source of air pollution. And it's a very toxic form of air pollution that comes from diesel engines and diesel emissions. Those can be replaced with near zero emission natural gas trucks running on carbon negative biogas and cut the air pollution by 90% or more and cut climate pollution by 100% or more. So that's my spiel about air pollution. Back to climate change, because both are important, but my passion is really dealing with climate change. Going back to short-lived climate pollutants, California is relying heavily on the reduction of short-lived climate pollutants to meet our 2030 climate requirements under state law, SB 32. The current climate change scoping plan is relying on short-lived climate pollutants for more than a third of all the carbon reductions we need to accomplish by 2030. And in 2016, we passed a state law codifying this. That law, SB 1383, requires a 40% reduction in methane, 75% diversion of organic waste away from landfills, and a 50% reduction in anthropogenic black carbon, which is human-caused black carbon emissions. It also requires the state to adopt policies and incentives to promote in-state production of biogas and biomethane from organic waste, because that's such an important tool to reduce short-lived climate pollutant emissions. Every single one of California's climate change plans calls for more bioenergy production from organic waste as a way to reduce climate pollution. So the climate change scoping plan says that we should be converting organic waste to bioenergy, biofuels, and renewable natural gas. The short-lived climate pollutant strategy says we should be converting organic waste to electricity, transportation fuel, and pipeline biogas. It also found that converting more of organic waste to energy would attract billions of dollars of new investment and thousands of new jobs in the state. In fact, CalRecycle has said that just converting all that organic landfill waste to energy and compost would create more than 13,000 new jobs. And these are high-skilled, good-paying jobs. California's Forest Carbon Plan says we cannot meet our climate goals without reducing wildfire emissions, that the lack of new bioenergy infrastructure is a major barrier to that, and that we need to quickly ramp up development of new, next-generation, small-scale bioenergy facilities. So that's all about the near-term goals. I mentioned that the other reason bioenergy is so important to meet our climate goals is for the long term. Under former Governor Brown, California established a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by mid-century. I mentioned at the beginning, I've been working on climate change for almost 25 years now. In January, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, a national research lab based in the Bay Area, released a really groundbreaking report. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it, partly because it's an outstanding report, but also because in the 25 years I've been working on climate change, it is by far the most encouraging report I have seen. In a full disclosure, I was a reviewer, a peer reviewer on the report, but I didn't write it. I'm not responsible for the content. The report reaches three main conclusions. Number one, achieving carbon neutrality by mid-century is absolutely doable with existing technologies. Number two, we are not going to eliminate about a third of all of our emissions by mid-century, things from agriculture, human waste, some amount of leakage, some continued amount of wildfire. So in order to achieve, number three is in order to achieve carbon neutrality, we have to offset the emissions we can't eliminate with carbon negative emissions. So where do we find carbon negative emissions? There are three main sources. The least expensive is restoring carbon to natural and working lands. That's the photo on the left. That means putting carbon back in agricultural soils and restoring forests and wetlands. That's the cheapest and has a lot of other co-benefits, but there's a finite amount we can do on natural and working lands in California. On the right-hand side, you have the most expensive but still important tool, which is direct air capture. That's literally using machines to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and then injecting it deep into the ground. That's still very important, or still very expensive, but we're going to need it. We're going to need every single tool in the toolkit. By far, the biggest opportunity for carbon negative emissions is converting waste biomass to energy with carbon capture and storage. That alone could provide 2/3 of all the carbon negative emissions we need to reach carbon neutrality by mid-century. And the great thing is we have waste biomass all over the state. Every community has it, and every community can use it to create local energy supplies, which will also increase community resilience against climate change and energy security. In Northern California, most of the organic waste is forest waste, and in the Sierras as well. In the Central Valley, it's mostly agricultural waste, and in urban areas, it's the biogas from landfills and wastewater treatment facilities, as well as the organic waste going to landfills, like food and yard waste. If you add all of that organic waste up, it's an enormous amount of energy potential. 4 million gasoline and gallon equivalents is more than enough to replace all of the diesel on the road in California and then some. It's also enough to provide about 15 to 20% of our electricity needs. I want to point out something else on this slide because it's a question I get asked a lot. Well, why don't we just convert it to compost? We like compost better. Compost is great for water efficiency and for returning nutrients to the soil, but compost is not carbon sequestration. In fact, compost continues to release a lot of methane and other volatile organic compounds, and it also breaks down very quickly. Sorry about that. So the first 5 categories in blue, that's digestible waste, meaning it's good for compost or anaerobic digestion, which can also create energy. But by far the largest categories of California's organic waste supply are non-digestible, the green categories. That's largely wood waste, nutshells, other cellulosic waste that doesn't break down easily. Not suitable for compost, it's not suitable for anaerobic digestion, but it can be converted to energy through non-combustion conversion technologies, primarily gasification or pyrolysis. So a great example of bioenergy at work. The photo on the bottom is the wastewater treatment facility for the city of San Diego, which produces enough biogas to power the entire wastewater treatment facility, and the extra biogas, because they produce more than they need from the wastewater, is sent in a San Diego gas and electric pipeline to UC San Diego, where it's used to power a 3-megawatt fuel cell. And the UC system as a whole has a biomethane procurement office, because most UC campuses have power generation on site to keep labs operating and hospitals and other essential services. Most of that generation is still coming from natural gas, and so the UC system, to meet its own carbon neutrality goal, is trying to purchase more carbon negative biomethane as a way to reduce the UC's carbon emissions. And there are examples like this up and down the state of biogas being used to provide carbon-free power. Bioenergy is also really important to meet our clean energy goals overall, in addition to its carbon benefits. We cannot get to 100% renewable power with solar and wind power and batteries alone, and that's for rather obvious reasons. Solar and wind don't operate all the time. Solar operates about 20% of the time, wind a little bit more, maybe 30%. And batteries only last 2 to 6 hours. We are never going to have enough batteries to get us weeks of energy storage when we have an El Nino winter with 3 or 4 weeks of heavy rain, or what we're experiencing now, which is weeks on end of heavy wildfire smoke. I have solar panels on my roof and they produce very little when it's smoky in the air. So we need biogas for flexible generation and baseload power that are available 24/7, 365 days a year. Not instead of solar or wind, but to fill in around them. Biogas can also provide a carbon negative fuel for vehicles and for backup generators. As I mentioned earlier, it's far cleaner than diesel. It can provide long duration storage. It can provide renewable hydrogen for fuel cells, like what you see in the UC San Diego photo. And it can provide a renewable fuel for end uses that can't be electrified. A lot of manufacturing and commercial processes require combustion because electricity by itself just doesn't get things hot enough, like to make steel or actually to manufacture solar cells. Solar panels require combustion to manufacture them. So if we want to continue having many manufacturing jobs in California or manufacturing industries, we need to find renewable fuels that can be used in combustion with very low or zero emissions. So I don't know if you want to talk about this now or wait till the end, but I do have a number of policy recommendations to increase sustainable bioenergy development in California. Sarah, why don't you tell me if you want me to hold off on this or run through these quickly now?
I think maybe let's hold off on it and then come back to the end, since Sam will probably do more introductory things, and then the policy change we can all talk about at the end.
Okay, great. I will hand the screen back to you then.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. I think everyone can agree, found that really interesting and like very current with everything going on. Sam, I think everyone just hold the questions. Remember your questions and hold them to the end. But Sam, I believe you have privileges to share your screen.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And it's a pleasure to follow Julia. She and I have worked together on a lot of things. What I'm going to say is very complimentary to what she's going to say. So let me just try and share my screen here. 1 second. Looks like I have to adjust my system preferences. I thought I already did that for Zoom. Give me 1 second here. Apologies.
No worries.
I have to restart if I'm going to do that. So, Sarah, do you have my slides? Do you mind sharing them? Sarah, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry.
Or you guys can wait for me to log back in.
Yeah, sorry. I have my email, so I can open.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries at all.
There's so many different webinar technologies now. I've done it
exactly.
all the other one, but apparently not for Zoom. So let me just start by saying, I've worked on climate change issues in California for over 10 years. I used to work at the California Air Resources Board, which is, one of the preeminent state agencies working on these things. And now I work for the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas, which is a national trade association. And we are always working closely with Julia, who focuses mostly on California, to try and get the right parts of what California is doing to support these feedstocks and these technologies deployed nationally. So I'll give a little bit more of a national look, but I'll also sort of reinforce some of the stuff that Julia said. We also, as an organization, focus a lot more on anaerobic digestion of the wastes that are most suited for that. Right now, we haven't done as much work on gasification of forest waste, even though I personally am a big believer in everything that Julia just laid out. And I spent 2 summers when I was an undergraduate fighting forest fires. And so I've been out there, I've seen the amount of material that needs to be removed, and we got to find some way to do something productive with that. So totally agree with her there. But if I could get the next slide, please. Thanks. This is just a little bit more about us. We are a pretty big tent organization, and we have 98% of the pipeline injected renewable gas in North America in our group. Next slide, please. Thanks. And I think it's helpful to sort of define some key terms for everybody, especially, if you've never heard of this stuff before, you don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. There's a lot of different types of low carbon or renewable gases that are out there. So I'm going to use the general term renewable gas to apply to everything that can help us get away from fossil natural gas, right? And within that broad category, I'm going to use the term renewable natural gas when it's a full substitute for conventional gas, like it's basically a methane molecule that can be used in the existing pipeline system today. The most common way of making a renewable natural gas right now is called biomethane, and it's derived either from anaerobic digestion or from gasification, as Julia talked about. But there's also hydrogen. And hydrogen is not a fully interchangeable gas with the current gas system. You could probably put a little bit in the current system, but Unfortunately, the current system just wouldn't really be able to accommodate a whole lot. So we have to think about how to transition the gas system to be ready to take more hydrogen in the long run. And hydrogen can be derived from all of these biofeedstocks that we're going to talk about, but it can also be made from electrolysis of water, using renewable electricity. And that's probably a pretty important long-term technology as well, because as Julia said, batteries are probably not sufficient to store energy seasonally or for long periods. And so hydrogen can do that. And a system that has a lot of strong hydrogen storage, probably integrates well with high penetration of solar and wind. So our group looks at all those things, but today, the most sort of commercially available technology that we really think the state should be doing more of is biomethane from anaerobic digestion. So next slide, please. And this slide is very similar to what Julia said. There's been so many studies about how the state can achieve its carbon goals. These 4 have been done all within the last 2 years, funded by various different parties, but they all say that renewable gas is going to be really important. And it's really every type of renewable gas. It's biomethane from anaerobic digestion and gasification, as well as hydrogen in the long run. So even though there's many different perspectives around everything else you need to do, the renewable natural gas story is always included in a very similar way when people look hard at getting to our long-term GHG reduction goals. And so given that agreement among the experts, it's kind of surprising that we're not actually moving faster on the ground. And so I think that is where the theme today is so important, right? Like motivating policymakers and spreading awareness about this opportunity. There really needs to be more of that done, because when the scientific experts at Lawrence Livermore and other places are telling us we have to do this and we have to start now, and there's still, very little actually happening on the ground, that's a challenge, and we have to work on advocacy to address that challenge. So next slide, please. Yeah, no, you can just skip this one. Thanks. There's an opportunity. That was my main point there. And the opportunity we really see right now is spread across these feedstocks. Julia touched on all the forest waste stuff, which we agree is critical, but we can't get people as excited about in Sacramento currently. So we've sort of narrowed our focus to these organic waste streams that can be treated using anaerobic digestion. And right now there's a lot of organic material in landfills, and those landfill systems have to capture the methane that results from the degradation of that material, but they don't all have to turn that into a useful source of energy. And we think they all should have to, right? Otherwise, you're just sort of flaring the gas and you're wasting it, and you're producing air pollution as you burn it on site. So instead of doing that, it should be injected into the pipeline system and used to replace conventional natural gas. So the picture on the right is a picture of a landfill, a well at a landfill that captures that methane, and hopefully takes it to something that's more useful than just a flare. There's also, as Julia mentioned, a lot of agricultural waste in the state, especially a lot of manure from animals, and the easiest place to capture that manure is at dairies. So the picture in the bottom middle sort of is an anaerobic digester that's called a covered lagoon digester at a dairy in California. And so what that looks like is this black membrane that goes over their big manure lagoon, and it captures methane coming off of their manure pond, and again can be used for pipeline injection to replace conventional gas. And then the other opportunity that's related to the amount going into landfills right now is dedicated anaerobic digestion facilities for food waste and green waste. And if you can just take that material out of the landfills and direct it toward these dedicated facilities, you're going to do a better job of capturing the gas, and it's going to be the right solution in the long run. However, even if you do that, there's still a lot of material in the landfills already, and that's going to keep producing methane. So you kind of have to do both. You got to get the organics out of the landfill, take it to these dedicated facilities, but also continue to capture the landfill gas and use it productively, and ideally increase the capture efficiency as you do that. So, this is a kind of a complicated set of feedstocks just by itself. even before you begin touching on the wood waste. And so we've spent a lot of time here, and you know, we've had some successes I'll get into. So we can go to the next slide. So the most established form of renewable natural gas, and really where our organization was founded on, was the landfill projects, because that's where there's already a lot of methane being produced, you know, from the landfill itself. And I'd say, you know, roughly half of the landfills in the country right now have some sort of useful use for their gas. A lot of it is to power, but there's still a lot of potential to do more. We still have all these candidate landfills shown on the left chart in green. So there's, you know, still much more that could be done with landfills, but that was sort of the low-hanging fruit, and people got started on that a while ago, and we've been making progress ever since. In California, a lot of it goes to small power projects right now, and those small power projects lately have been facing concerns about their air quality performance at their gen sets and everything. But the alternative is really flaring that gas, which also produces air pollution. So, you know, this is a funny place where, again, policymakers haven't really thought all this through, and they need to work harder to recognize that the landfill gas resource is going to be used somehow, or needs to be used somehow. And, you know, our organization thinks basically we should try and get as much of that as possible into the pipeline to replace the conventional fossil gas. So next slide. Another area we've worked on a lot is the dairies. There's really over 8,000 large dairy and hog operations that you know, are well suited to energy projects across the country, but there's only 255 operational projects in the U.S. right now. So there's a lot more that could be done here. It really needs to be done unless folks stop consuming milk, as we talked about at the outset, right? I mean, of course, you can do as much as you can to reduce demand for these agricultural products, but you know, it's a big challenge because unfortunately the average consumer wants to eat more pizza, right? And a lot of these large farms go to making cheese for pizza, right? So that's a fundamental challenge I think you have to approach from both ways. You can try and reduce demand by getting folks to switch to be vegetarian and vegan, but at the same time, you also need to do your best to control the methane emissions from the remaining farms and to do something productive with it. So next slide, please. And then getting in briefly to like sort of how the feedstocks from those anaerobic digestion sources look compared to the gasification. This is a study that was done last year by the American Gas Foundation, looking at basically every way you can make good renewable gas. And they found that nationally, it really is the gasification feedstocks that can make a bigger difference. You know, landfills are important, ag manure is important, but probably getting into gasification at some point is going to be needed. And I think Julia is really one of the foremost experts in explaining that importance of getting there. So, you know, we believe that too, but we recognize that there's a lot of folks who get concerned every time you start mentioning forest residue. And so we tried to think of this, you know, sort of stepwise, right? Like if we can't handle the anaerobic digestion discussion, we're going to have a real hard time getting to gasification and getting past that to power to gas, where you actually, you know, electrolyze water and combine it with a biogenic source of CO2 to get a methane molecule. It's probably an even harder lift. So, you know, I think that these are all the ways you can make renewable gas. And if you do that, you can replace a significant amount of the current gas demand. But we think of the anaerobic digestion stuff as the easiest, gasification sort of second, and then eventually power to gas is more of a long-term solution. But certainly something that, you know, could become more of a near-term solution if electrolyzer costs come down a lot, which they are doing, which is exciting. So next slide, please. But mentioning costs, you know, I think one thing everyone should be aware of is, unfortunately, these renewable gases are not cost competitive with conventional gas right now without policy support. And so this chart sort of shows how much various types of renewable gas might cost on a dollar per unit of energy basis. And then that dashed line at the bottom is conventional gas prices. So obviously it's less than the renewable gases. Conventional gas is super cheap right now. I would say it's, you know, at almost a historical low, and it's because of fracking, right? It's because of this way of extracting gas that engineers at natural gas companies discovered that basically makes it very cheap to get out of the ground in the U.S. especially. And so we have to recognize that the switch toward renewable gas has gotten harder because the economics have shifted because of fracking. But I mean, we all know that fracking is not a long-term sustainable practice and really can't be relied upon when we're in this carbon-constrained world. So we need to switch to renewable gases as fast as we can. But I think this is just important for everyone to know because, you know, obviously there are people who would say this stuff is too expensive. And, you know, while we fundamentally disagree with that, I think it's good for you folks as advocates to understand that there is a cost differential and public policy is necessary to change that cost differential. So next slide. So Julia did a pretty deep dive on the Lawrence Livermore stuff, but I thought I'd also touch on it from a slightly different angle. If you don't think about the cost comparison being about how much does it cost to make a unit of energy, but rather you think about it in terms of how much does it cost to reduce a ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent, all of a sudden a lot of these bioenergy solutions look really good because partially they address short-lived climate pollutants, like Julia said, and also because they can be carbon negative. They can put carbon underground or take it out of the atmosphere without having to build that mechanical carbon capture and sequestration that Julia was speaking to. So basically what the Lawrence Livermore work says is that in the long run, we need to take all of this waste, including the waste that needs to be gasified, and convert it to hydrogen and take the CO2 from that conversion and sequester it in the ground. And we're a long way away from that, but I think that's a really compelling long-term vision. I think they're absolutely right on that's, you know, the way to go, and it needs to be started as soon as possible. And so this chart just shows what that looks like on a dollar per metric ton basis. And you can see that all the biological solutions are cheaper than direct air capture and really cheaper than a lot of additional renewables and stuff like solar and wind, even though that's not shown on this chart. On the next chart, I have a comparison of that. So, you know, the next one. This is from a separate study that tries to look across all the different ways we can get to carbon neutrality. And bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration and direct air capture are up at the top because they're negative emission technologies. And they clearly need to be done because they're much less expensive than trying to like electrify heavy duty industry boilers, for example, which is up at $890 a ton. So, you know, as I said, a lot of the studies that folks do on this say we have to use bioenergy and it needs to be done in a carbon negative way. And really renewable natural gas is the main type of carbon negative bioenergy that's out there right now and is being done today. So we need to do more of it faster. That's the high level takeaway. Next slide, please. And the other thing I wanted to say is that when everyone does these long-term studies, it's surprising that you need to do both hydrogen and renewable gas, especially in the near term. So you can get up to like 23% of current gas demand with these types of solutions. And so you have to also cut demand a lot through electrification or efficiency or something else. And that means that this type of solution is not in conflict with efforts to electrify transport or to electrify home heating, et cetera. It's really all of the above solution. It's not an either or. It's a balanced portfolio of low carbon technologies that are going to get us to these goals. So I think next slide. I did want to touch quickly on just keep going. One more forward if you don't mind, Sarah. Thanks. So here's the challenge, right? Sorry, go back one. Here's the challenge. We've seen that there are good programs that California has that are in place right now. I used to run a program called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard that focuses on transportation. And we've seen the growth in renewable natural gas used in transport grow dramatically because of that program and a few other good policies the state has in place. And so now 86% of fossil gas has been displaced and is now used as renewable gas in these low NOx natural gas trucks that Julia talked about. And so given that, I mean, that's a clear success. It's an air quality win. It's a big GHG, greenhouse gas win. And it's happened fast. It's really happened over 5 or 6 years. And so we could absolutely do that for other sources of natural gas demand. So that's what my next slide shows. If you don't mind, Sarah, next one, thanks. If you look at the right-hand part of this picture, we have like the different types of end-use gas demand. And you can see the transport in the vehicle filling station little picture there is only 1% of all natural gas demand. The big other demands are residential and commercial heating primarily, industrial applications, and power production. And those all dwarf transportation, but there's very little incentive to use renewable natural gas in those other big sectors right now. And so even though California's done a pretty good job of promoting the first few projects and getting some renewable natural gas production capacity built in state, the end use demand pull is not there yet. So we really need to work on getting people excited about using renewable natural gas in their businesses, in their homes, and to produce some power to balance out the intermittent renewables, as Julia talked about. So those are all big opportunities that need more policy support and really need, leaders to come forward and make this happen. And those leaders need to hear from folks like yourselves to let them know it's a priority. So that next slide, please. The last thing I would say is really that the industry is growing a lot as a result of the transportation support. We brought on more RNG production facilities in the last year or so than we did in the first 30 years of existence. And these are the facilities that are getting the gas into the pipeline to replace the conventional gas. And they're spread across the country, and really they're being done anywhere there's a good opportunity with a lot of organic waste that would otherwise just go into a landfill and produce methane. So we feel like it's happening, but this is only the tip of the iceberg, right? We really need to do this at a much larger scale, and the industry is just starting to mature enough where we're ready to take another big step forward and become a national player in the energy scene. So we've seen solar and wind get there. We really need to take bioenergy there overall, and renewable natural gas is poised to be, I would say, the first that can do it for non-transportation end uses. You're going to, sort of see folks point out that we have solutions to our renewable power challenges. We have solutions in transport through electric vehicles and through renewable diesel and other fuels like that. But we really haven't tackled heating yet, and we need to pay more attention there. So our members spend a lot of time trying to think about that too, and how to get renewable natural gas into every sustainable end use. So that's pretty much all I have. Happy to talk more about how we can help get people's attention and how to effectuate change.
Great. Thanks so much, Sam. Before we move on, Julia, do you want to go into those policy changes?
Sure, actually it fits really well with what Sam was just saying.
Perfect.
So I have to get back. Let's see. Okay. Oops, sorry. One too far. Okay, so Sam touched on this and did a really good job. It's fun working together. And I agree with everything he said, and the way he presented it is there's definitely a sequence of what's happening with renewable gas and anaerobic digestion which works with dairy manure, food waste, that happens in a landfill or at a wastewater treatment facility. That's definitely sort of the first horse out of the gate. But we're starting to see some gasification projects in development in California using forest and agricultural waste, one of which is going to inject it in the pipeline for the first time in California, near Bakersfield in Kern County, using all nutshells. And they're going to convert it to RNG, put it in a pipeline, use it for transportation. So that's coming, and I agree with Sam that power to gas, which is using excess solar and wind to create a synthetic methane, that's coming as well, but a little bit farther behind. So I was thinking kind of high level, what are the most important policy changes California could enact to really help move bioenergy and renewable gas forward more quickly, which we absolutely have to do to meet our climate goals as well as air quality goals. So on the electricity sector, Sam, one of his slides showed the Biomass program. That's a very small pilot program that requires 250 megawatts of new, very small scale distributed generation bioenergy facilities. So the program requires 250 megawatts total, and it has to come from 3 megawatt and smaller projects. So really quite local projects. And the whole reason is so that the projects use local organic waste to provide local energy. But that is just a pilot scale program. Going forward, California has got to diversify its renewable electricity portfolio. We have a goal now to get to 100% RPS eligible or carbon-free power. The carbon-free will be hydropower, which is not considered a renewable resource. But other than that, everything has to be renewable. We know we can't do it with solar and wind alone, but the California Public Utilities Commission, which regulates the utilities, hasn't adopted a policy either to place higher value on flexible generation and baseload power like bioenergy or geothermal. And it also hasn't set a specific requirement for that or put sufficient monetary value on those operational attributes that we need. So that's probably number one priority in the electricity sector. And I think that we're going to see legislation on this next year, in part because of the rolling blackouts a couple of weeks ago and the threat of more rolling blackouts this weekend because of the heat wave. Ironically, solar becomes less effective when it's very, very hot, just as it becomes less effective when there's wildfire smoke in the air. So we need a more diverse portfolio for reliability purposes. And I think the legislature is going to move forward on that in the next year if the PUC does not. We've also got to set some goals for long duration energy storage. California has by law an energy storage portfolio standard, just like our renewable electricity portfolio standard, but there's no preference for long duration storage. And we know that we're going to need long duration storage. 2 to 4 hour storage does not get us to reliable electricity supplies, especially as we electrify more and more end uses. And then we need to reward carbon negative power generation. Part of the reason that we've seen a lot more growth in renewable gas or biomethane on the transportation side, thanks in large part to Sam, when he was at the Air Board. California's low carbon fuel standard rewards low carbon fuels based on their life cycle carbon intensity. And since biomethane can be carbon negative, in some cases extremely carbon negative, like in the case of dairy biogas, it is extremely lucrative under the low carbon fuel standard. On the electricity side, on the other hand, all renewables are treated the same, even though biomethane from organic waste can be orders of magnitude lower carbon than solar or wind. So we need the electricity side to move toward more of a model like we have on the transportation side that's carbon intensity based. It's no longer enough just to be renewable. We have to look at life cycle carbon emissions. On the transportation side, the LCFS has worked to promote biomethane development and use in California, but we could do a lot more with it. And that means guaranteeing the long-term value of LCFS credits, low carbon fuel standard credits, because the oil industry, which is the main purchaser of the credits, just buys them 1 year or 2 years at a time. And that makes it a lot harder to finance projects. The state needs to continue to subsidize the cleanest vehicles, like the near zero emission natural gas trucks that can run on biogas. They're still a little bit more expensive than diesel trucks, but that cost difference is well worth it when you think about the climate and air quality benefits. We also need the Air Board and the California Energy Commission to focus more on near-term benefits and cost effectiveness. They're very focused on mid-century goals and electrifying everything, and that's great, but we can't lose sight of near-term needs to reduce short-lived climate pollutants and reduce air pollution. So we've got to be able to do both at the same time. And then the gas standard, I totally agree with Sam. We've got to move forward on a renewable gas procurement requirement, very much like we have on the electricity side. And we need to develop additional pipeline injection standards so that we can put hydrogen in the pipelines or biomethane from gasification. The state still doesn't have standards for either of those. And the default standard, which is for landfill gas, really isn't appropriate for forest waste or agricultural waste, which will have very different properties than the biogas from landfills. So there are 100 more things we need to do, but if I could wave a wand, those would be the 8 or 10 most important in the next year or two. Sam probably can add others as well.
Yeah, Julie, I really agree with your list here. I mean, I think that this is a great starting point. And I think that really the problem is historically, bioenergy has been sort of pitted against other options that seem cleaner to people, like solar and wind, and has lost as those technologies have really gotten a lot cheaper, which is great, right? I mean, it's fantastic that solar and wind have gotten, in some cases, less expensive than power generated from fossil gas. But it turns out you still really need to do these bioenergy projects because the system won't operate without some dispatchable energy. And we're seeing that with the recent blackouts, et cetera, right? So we know that bioenergy is needed on the power side. It's already beginning to be used more in transport, and really nothing is being done to address the GHG emissions from natural gas use in the home or from large industrial uses of natural gas. And we have to do something there too. So, I mean, I think the average person doesn't know about this opportunity. As I said, they don't think about their trash as something that can be a resource and can be turned into energy. But if we don't do that, we're not going to get to our goals. And so that's why, we're so focused on trying to build awareness and get policymakers excited about, creating the right programs that can actually effectuate this change. And Julie and I spend all of our time doing it. So, we're pretty deep in the weeds, but I'd love to hear from you folks as to, if this is a compelling idea for you, and, just get your thoughts. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that was a perfect segue. I think I just want to start off and say, thank you both for speaking. I'm so happy to have two speakers that were so complimentary of each other. But we're gonna open it up to Q&A. Super open discussion. Please just unmute your mic, put them in the chat, whatever. I think a few questions were already written. Yeah, Dave had a question. Dave, do you want me to read it, or you can say it out loud too?
Yeah, this was for Sam. And as somebody who has a fuel cell vehicle, I've had experiences where the filling stations have been low on hydrogen, and was wondering why you sort of gave short shift to converting more methane to hydrogen.
Yeah, I think it's just the state has been trying for a long time to set up a hydrogen, infrastructure on the vehicle side. And I mean, I've worked in that area myself. I know how hard it is. I think it's great that we've gotten as far as we have. We're absolutely leading relative to anywhere else in the country. But it's still not to the point where there's really a lot of energy going through those stations right now. So it's just at such a small scale still. A lot of the renewable natural gas producers don't target hydrogen as an end use. If that changes, I think that the renewable natural gas producers will shift, and they'll try and make hydrogen to sell to those vehicles. But there's a goal of about 200 stations that Governor Brown put out there. And if I'm correct, I think we're almost at 100 right now. So, that's still very small compared to the thousands of gas stations that we have, or even compared to the amount of electric vehicle charging infrastructure that we've gotten installed in the state now. So I really believe hydrogen is a long-term important energy carrier for a variety of reasons, especially the energy storage reasons that Julia mentioned. But unfortunately, the costs today still remain pretty high compared to other options. So, you know, I hope that it keeps getting better. I do think that, you know, like there's a way that electrolyzers can come down in price a lot, and people are going to get better at distributing the hydrogen to the stations. People are going to get better at building the stations for less money. But the amount of hydrogen dispensed today into, you know, the Mirais and other hydrogen vehicles is really, really small compared to total energy demand in the state. So that's why I sort of jumped over it, right? I mean, when we look at producing renewable natural gas to displace conventional gas, you know, I showed those percentages, and the demand in transport for natural gas is 1% of total natural gas demand. Hydrogen is probably like 0.1% of you know, total energy demand in transport. So it's just you know, it's not big enough yet. It needs to grow. I think especially for heavy duty vehicles, it's going to be essential in the long run, but it's still really small right now.
Yeah, trucks and buses make a lot of sense to do that, and it just seems like it's a chicken or the egg thing. You know, if there's not enough supply, people aren't going to convert, and without users, there's not the incentive to convert.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, I think the state's done its best to address the chicken and the egg at the same time by pushing the vehicle manufacturers to actually deploy vehicles in the state and get the stations built and make sure the producers have the hydrogen for the stations. But there's growing pains associated with that, as you probably know, because when you pull up to a station and there's not hydrogen there, I'm sure it's frustrating. And only smart early adopters like yourself are going to be willing to deal with that. And so we need to get past that to the point where the average person can buy a hydrogen car and drive it comfortably, just as they can an electric car right now, right? And then those two things can compete in the light duty space. And then the heavy duty space, you know, direct use of renewable natural gas and hydrogen are probably going to be pretty important competitors with electricity in sort of the medium-sized truck applications. So that's all to say that, yeah, it's going to be important eventually. It's probably also going to be important in the pipeline, and the pipelines need to be set up to deal with hydrogen in the long run. But that's also a huge infrastructure challenge that Julie and I are starting to talk about at the Public Utilities Commission right now, but they're having a hard time with it. I'll put it that way.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I have something really quick. I feel like there has not been any kind of like the public doesn't know what's going on in legislation, what lawmakers are pushing right now, or they've been pushing, and this whole electrification thing, right? They're just been really, really hardcore on pushing that, and the general public doesn't know what that really means. As far as higher bills, you can't go all electric, like you guys were talking about. The wind's not always going to blow. The sun's not always going to shine. And we don't have the capacity to store all that energy. And it's to the point where we actually have to pay other states to take our energy. So it's ridiculous. I think this is great. The RNG, this whole RNG project and movement is so great. I mean, we can just look at Germany as it is right now. I was reading some stuff where they try to do the whole electrification thing, but in a sense, I feel they failed. And now they have to go back to coal, right? They've been going back to coal. So that's their source of energy, as what we use over here in California, our natural gas, right? So now the general public is feeling the burden, because now they have higher gas bills, or not gas bills, so it's higher energy bills. So it's great that you guys are pushing for this new renewable energy. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, but I feel like there's not enough, the general public is not really informed on all this stuff.
Jorge or George, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, I'm sorry.
Either way.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's something Sam and I and others in our field have really been trying to work against. And it's not just the public, but there are a lot of policymakers in California, including some key energy policy spots, who still think solar and maybe a little bit of wind and batteries or battery electric vehicles as the storage for our electricity infrastructure are going to be enough. And we could talk all day about just how nuts that is. It's not enough. But I think that we've also lost some common sense in California. I mean, if you think about any complex system, requires diversity and it requires redundancy to be reliable. So to me, it's not even, we don't even have to get to the question of should we electrify everything? Can we get all of our electricity from solar, wind, and batteries, which aren't generation, they're storage. And whatever it costs, it's just not going to be reliable. So we don't even have to get to cost. It's not the right thing to do. You know, when you think about El Nino winters or bad wildfire smoke periods or bad heat waves, I mean, if you talk to hospitals or ambulance services, firefighters, there is no way they are going to rely 100% on electricity. So what's happening in the meantime, because the state is so fixated on a very small, dangerously small number of energy sources right now, the utilities are handing out diesel backup generators. And all of the essential services in California are buying diesel backup generators like crazy for reliability. That's just stupid when we have hydrogen, when we have biomethane and other renewable sources. So I think we have to get back to some level of common sense in California, and that starts with diversity. I mean, if you think about agriculture, nutrition, ecosystems, you want diversity, you want redundancy, not fossil fuels. Sam and I are not trying to defend or extend the life of fossil fuels, but there's a much wider portfolio of renewable energy options available. And I think, I'll just say for myself, if I could leave you with any message today, it is that we have to push for more diversity in our renewable energy sectors.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only thing I would add to that is that those that are pushing electrification know that it's a long-term solution. It takes a very long time to switch everybody over to electric vehicles or to electric water heaters and space heaters. You know, the heat pumps are efficient in your home, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that technology. It's still expensive, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's just going to take a real long time to get people to change over. Like, you know, if you have a gas water heater today and it breaks, you're not going to put in a heat pump water heater and pay thousands of dollars more to have your house rewired when all you want is a hot shower, right? You need to be able to find a renewable energy that works in your existing infrastructure. And, you know, for a long time, a lot of people's water heaters aren't going to break. So, you know, the idea that we're going to suddenly snap our fingers and everything's going to be electrified, it's just not very sensible. And in the meantime, you can also begin displacing conventional gas with a drop-in substitute with renewable gas. So these two things are not in conflict, despite what I think you see in the popular press. Most experts agree you kind of have to do both, you know, electrify where it makes sense, and also produce as many renewable gases as you can to use in the existing infrastructure and for storage and, you know, to supply energy when the sun and wind are not on, right? So, I mean, like as Julia said, it's kind of common sense, but you'd be surprised how polarized things have gotten. And, you know, I think grassroots advocacy that calls for common sense energy policy would be extremely helpful right now.
Right. Thank you, guys. And then there's like this whole push to like electrify by a certain date. And now we have a lot of businesses going out of business. How do they convert, right? They're barely trying to make ends meet. And now we're talking about high level industry equipment and now they have to convert. So I don't see how that's fair or feasible. We shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We should have a diverse portfolio and leave it to the public, right? To choose what they want.
I mean, you can't ask a restaurant to buy a new, you know, induction heat stove when they have no customers because of COVID, right? I mean, people need to be mindful of the economic reality and how long it's really going to take to convert everything to electricity. So, but you know that it's tough sometimes. Go ahead, Julia.
Sam's right about the timeline, but there are two other factors. I think there's a real question, should we even want to convert everything to electricity, given electricity faces serious reliability issues in California? You know, if you think about rolling blackouts, if you think about how much electricity infrastructure has caused the majority of our large wildfires over the last decade. You know, and you think about how vulnerable electricity poles and wires are really flimsy when you think about it. Natural gas infrastructure or renewable gas infrastructure is largely underground and it's much more sturdy. There have been a lot of studies on how much more vulnerable electricity infrastructure is to climate change impacts, wildfire, or other disruptions. So I'm not sure the goal should be to electrify everything. I think some things, absolutely. Could we electrify more than we have now? Definitely. But I don't actually think the goal should even be to electrify everything, because I think that does make us really, really vulnerable. And I think that only is going to trigger more diesel backup generators for reliability purposes. But the other thing I want to go back to, just to remind everybody, which is where I started at the beginning of my presentation, is even if we focus on electrifying everything, even if it made sense, which I don't think it does, even if it was affordable, which it's not, it doesn't do anything for the climate in the next several decades. Our number one priority has to be dealing with reduction of short-lived climate pollutant emissions. That is so much more critical. It is so much more beneficial to the climate. And so this focus on electricity or electrifying everything, unless the electricity is all going to come from biomethane, it's not the most urgent thing by a long shot that we need to do for climate change. So it's really, I think, harmful to far more critical efforts.
Yeah, I see a question in the chat. Go ahead.
Just lastly, I'm sorry, just to add to the whole conversation really quick, I'm sorry. Just the general cost for the general public, right? You're asking them to convert all your appliances to electricity when your bill is completely high. Your electric bill in the summer times is completely high. It's ridiculous, right? 200, depends on where you live. But now on the winter time, when you have to kick on your heating unit, it's not as expensive as electric. So natural gas is, to me, is pretty cheap already. So if we ask people to go completely electric, I mean, they're just going to have a high bill year round. That's unfair to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, you know, there absolutely has been real improvements in affordability because of conventional gas getting so cheap, and the system is already there. So we need to use it. You know, we really shouldn't be thinking about increasing the size of the electric infrastructure while we're scrapping a fully usable set of gas lines and, you know, existing appliances that work well. Like, you just can't tear up all that stuff and throw it out without huge costs to everybody, especially not when there's a better, you know, solution that's available, and you can do at the same time as you electrify parts of the new built environment, you know. So we got to do both. I think that's the takeaway.
If I can, I want to share a slide, Jorge, that I think kind of responds to your question. See if I can pull it up. Can you all see this slide from the Netherlands?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know the print is really small. The Netherlands is one of the first few countries in the world. There's only a very small handful that have adopted nationwide carbon neutrality plans or climate neutrality. And this goes to Jorge's question. So the Netherlands plan covers 7 sectors. In 6 of the 7 sectors, bioenergy plays a really important role. And in all of them, I don't know if you can read the print, they're using local organic waste to provide local energy. In some cases, it's biofuels for airplanes and heavy duty trucks. That's the graphic on the right. In others, it's providing district heating or home heating. And then it's cooling as well as electricity and other needs. And so I think that's absolutely part of sustainability. In fact, National Geographic had an issue about a year ago. The whole entire issue was on the future of cities. And one of the big messages of that issue was we need to stop putting waste in landfills or burning it and using it for local energy supplies. So I do think this is coming, but just not as quickly as it needs to. But in actually, much as California is ahead of a lot of the rest of the country, we're not ahead of most other developed economies, like in Europe or in East Asia. They are well ahead of us on using organic waste for energy.
his point transfers very well into one of the questions that I put into the chat, which was along the lines of addressing kind of the loop of as a consumer that we're eating and contributing food waste to the landfills, and what infrastructure is it going to take to kind of give that energy back to the communities that are consuming and contributing the energy source for biomethane production.
I'm not sure if I understood the question, but how are we going to reduce food waste going to landfills?
No, because food waste is part of the production of the biomethane. Am I correct in that?
So,
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sam.
I think I could take a crack at answering it. So, there needs to be closed loop cycles that are ideally, local if possible, right? Where it makes sense, the organic waste should go from a community to a local digester, and the energy from that digester should be used in that community. You're never going to get a perfect balance of that across, the state or across even a couple of neighboring states. But you should start with that in mind. And I think that the way that the state's Cal Recycle Agency is implementing Senate Bill 1383 is in line with that. They have these procurement targets for organic waste material, including biomethane, that match pretty well with how much organic waste the jurisdiction makes. So I think that's their goal. The challenge is in practice, like actually getting facilities sited and, getting local government excited about new composting or new anaerobic digestion is tough, right? I mean, not everyone wants to live next to one of these things because, especially next to a compost facility, they smell pretty bad sometimes. AD is better because it's all enclosed, but folks don't want to live next to these waste disposal units, even though they're much better environmentally than landfills. And so I think there was a question about, how do communities deal with these projects? And it's a challenge. I think everybody faces siting challenges, but AD, I think, is easier to site. Anaerobic digestion is easier to site than composting in most cases because there are less odors. And it's also just a great thing to do before you compost to remove some of the volatile material. And, so we feel like you got to do that. You got to get as much AD built as you can so that there's more community acceptance. And then you have some composting where it makes sense and to return the organics to the soil in an effective way, even after you make a digestate in an AD facility. So that's sort of a long answer, but in reality, like nobody likes the waste they produce. And nobody really wants to live next to a huge dairy either, even if they love pizza, right? So it is a challenge. And I think the best thing I can say, especially to local decision makers, is be honest with your community about the waste that they create and about the best ways to deal with that waste. And then once you're honest with people about that, I think most people will accept, hey, I contributed to this problem, but there's something useful we can do with this material. Let's build a renewable natural gas facility.
Yeah, I just want to add two things to that. The first is some people say, well, why can't we just keep putting food waste and yard waste in landfills because they're producing biomethane and we'll just capture the biomethane? There are two reasons why that doesn't work. One is landfills have enormous amounts of methane leaks, and we're not going to be able to capture all those because landfills are built in cells, like a beehive, and there are leaks just all over the place. And it's very hard to go back into a landfill once it's built and largely filled and stop those leaks. So it's not a good long-term strategy. But the other reason landfills aren't the right place long-term to be processing food waste into energy is there's a lot of contamination in landfills. And for biogas cleanup, a landfill is a lot more expensive than a standalone anaerobic digestion facility like what Sam is talking about. The other issue related to leaks is the carbon intensity of landfill biogas is a lot higher than the carbon intensity of a standalone anaerobic digestion facility because it's the anaerobic digestion facility is a sealed tank where bacteria digest the food waste or yard waste And so that kind of biomethane is considered carbon negative because there's virtually no leakage at all, where there's significant leakage from landfills. So we really do need to move in that direction. And we are starting to see cities do it. In fact, one of the slides I showed, I didn't point out, but there's a photo of a facility taking a lot of your food waste. In fact, most of your food waste in Los Angeles goes to one of two facilities now. One is at the wastewater treatment facility in Carson, just south of the city of Los Angeles. And the other is a new facility, a member of both Sam's and mine, Energia, built in Rialto, which is just across the county line in San Bernardino County, is going to be taking 320,000 tons of food waste per year and converting it to biomethane, which is going to put in a pipeline to use offsite and near zero emission natural gas trucks to replace diesel. So we need 100 more of these projects around the state, but I think we're going to see them in part because state law says we have to cut organic waste going to landfills by 75%. The one other opportunity which avoids a lot of the siting issues or permitting issues is the State Water Board just came out with an assessment of the capacity of existing wastewater treatment facilities to take in food waste. A lot of wastewater treatment facilities like the one I mentioned in Carson, the one near me, which serves San Francisco and the east side of the Bay Area. The wastewater treatment facilities were built in the 70s when we had a lot more rain, we had a lot more runoff. And so they have excess capacity, and they're already doing anaerobic digestion as part of the wastewater cleanup process. So a lot of them have capacity to take in food waste, and the State Water Board found that across the state, our wastewater treatment facilities could process with existing infrastructure about half of all the food waste that's going to landfills right now. So that's, I was going to say really low hanging fruit, but that would be a really bad unintended pun. That's an easy opportunity with existing facilities to deal with a lot of our food waste.
I want to bring that back to that question that Sam mentioned, which I was asking, like, how do these projects and infrastructures affect the communities and the lands that they're built in? Like Carson was mentioned, you know, like these are largely low-income communities that get kind of pushed into projects and infrastructure that take up land and push people out. And so I'm also wondering, like, how can these larger projects not kind of injure communities that are low income, that may not actually benefit from these infrastructures as a higher income community that may have subsidized that project?
So I think there are a couple things. When we're talking about urban projects, like the ones that are taking food waste and yard waste, those are all being built on brownfields, usually on existing industrial sites, either existing wastewater treatment facilities or existing landfills, or the project I mentioned, the Energia project, is built in the middle of a large industrial zone. Anaerobic digestion itself does not have significant air pollution emissions. It's not emission free, but it's very, very low emission. This is not combustion, and even gasification is not combustion. It's superheating the material. So if you don't combust on site, and I referenced in my presentation old generation technology and new generation. First generation biomass facilities are very polluting. They're using direct combustion. A lot of them don't have best available control technologies. And 3 of them in California are burning mixed waste, not just the organic fraction. We need to shut the rest of those down. But anaerobic digestion and gasification are not combustion. So they're extremely low emission, and generally they are going on industrial sites. That changes when we start talking about dairy waste, agricultural waste, and forest waste. But there, the dairy digesters that have been built so far in California show a really significant net reduction in air pollution compared to open piles of manure, which are huge sources of air pollution, odor, and water pollution. And then when you get to agricultural and forest waste, well, the alternative is largely open burning with no pollution control. As I said, bioenergy is 99% less polluting than an open burn. So it really depends on the feedstock type and the technology. But the one thing I think we should all agree on is we need to shut down the old direct combustion facilities, because those are polluting, and there are way better alternatives available now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the product developers, have learned from this experience, and I think they're trying to be good stewards of the community and to have good relationships with the community. But it's challenging because of that legacy of these higher emitting, first gen waste to energy plants that people, they've had bad experiences with. But I think that's part of the reason that our organization also focuses on pipeline injection as the right use of the gas, because no one wants to see a new smokestack go up in their neighborhood. And so if you can eliminate that, don't do a power gen project, and instead try and get it in the gas pipeline and displace, where the conventional gas is being burned, that helps. And pay close attention to the odor issues and other things if it's, the main concern folks have. And I do think anaerobic digestion is probably the best way to deal with that, because, landfills have pretty bad odor problems. Composting can have some pretty bad odor issues, and AD is better than those two. So, it's about minimizing the local impacts, and then being honest with folks about whatever remains, and letting people have a real voice in the process, and making sure that I think California's pretty good at that with CEQA and other things, but, making sure that people are listened to before something's built, and using existing infrastructure wherever you can, including the existing gas pipeline, existing wastewater treatment plants, as Julia said. Let's not build anything new if we don't have to.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a great Q&A. Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next part since we do have a limited time. So I'm going to share my screen to share the advocacy skill presentation. Let's see this up. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me just make sure I can see you. Okay, so today's skill is about, let's see. Here we go. So today's skill is about using social media in the way to gain attention, raise awareness, and to encourage change. So in this era of social media, there's been something created called call out culture. And this is just how social media has really allowed everyone to have a voice, despite the platform. It's a quick and convenient way, and it's an easy way to be heard and get the word out. A lot of people have been using this, say an easy example is say if you went to a restaurant and you were disappointed with the service, you could use social media to say that. And I think something specifically in current events is the Black Lives Matter movement, because so many people have been using it to call out police officers that have been wrong, and to sign petitions and to get justice. So I think when you look at what it can do, obviously you use social media to share about your personal life with your friends, but it can even really be used as a marketing tool and a way to get the word out. So it doesn't have to just be to voice displeasure or concern, but it can also be used to raise awareness and encourage change. So someone doesn't have to do something bad they could, but it could just be an opportunity to encourage change and what's important to you. When you're looking at what are the types of social media, I'm definitely millennial, so I think I'm very current with this, but I think a lot apply to a lot of people, and there are more sources than you think there are. So obviously there's Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and Nextdoor for more local and neighborhood or communal projects. And you could even do mass emails and phone calls, or even newsprints and online prints. So there's definitely a lot of options. So if you don't think you're very current with the times, don't feel discouraged, because there are a lot of options. So when we're talking about this, it's we're trying to reach out to someone, or you're trying to maybe call out someone, a company or someone that isn't using renewable energy or something like that. So I think one of the first things to do in this is to decide who you're reaching out to and on what scale that is, whether it's local, community, city, or national. When I think of local, I kind of think of your local restaurants, small businesses, school districts, stuff like that. like obviously you could go into the corporate giants like Amazon and create whole petitions for that. You also use it to reach out to your elected officials, or maybe like people who work for your elected officials, because they can communicate it to them. And when I was like researching this, I looked up a lot of things and how people respond to action. So when someone is called out or a company is called out, they usually want to show like they want to make a difference. So they're almost like overcorrecting. So they could even make so many material changes to show that they're authentic, or trying to like please their customers or something like that. I think it's just valuable to see that like social media really has given the power for so many people to stand up and vent their frustrations and advocate or demand for a solution. So when you're looking at this, you might be thinking like what should you say in it? And for me, I think there's kind of two parts to it. Maybe whoever you're reaching out to has poor methods, or they did something wrong, or they could do it better. And so you're kind of pointing that out, or like putting the camera focus on it. And then in addition, maybe you're proposing new ideas. So how can they do it better? So I think an example we were talking about earlier, way back in the icebreaker, is like COVID, and how many things have turned into like single-use plastic and stuff like that. So maybe something you wanted to do is like reach out, or like say tag a restaurant because they're using like plastic and styrofoam in all their takeout options, when there's greener options available. And I think there's multiple ways to do this, like to raise awareness or to organize something. So there, you could tag the company directly. You could make a petition. You could send that out. You could encourage friends to do the same. Or you could even organize protests and marches. I think we all have seen how common that is during the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm going to come back to that. But before we break, so these are the things to kind of think of. It's like, who do you want to reach out to? What are they doing wrong? And what can they do better? And how could they do it better? And what outlets do you think you're going to share it on? Now I'm going to go back to this one. I think social media is a great way. It can reach a lot of places, but it's not always, it can't reach everyone. So another thing is influencing policymakers. So I'm actually going to throw this to Julia and Sam for a second, because they have been like these policymaker influencers. So I think they have some great tips on this too.
Sam, you want me to start?
Sure, go ahead, Julia.
Okay, so I am a dinosaur. I'm in my late 50s, and I don't do a lot of social media. So this may partly reflect my bias, but I have been both an advocate and a policymaker in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. for about 30 years now. And I think my sense is social media can be really important. I mean, incredibly powerful for shaping the public conversation, for organizing events, for organizing action, but for actually influencing policymakers, it takes more one-on-one communication. And traditionally, there's been a hierarchy of advocacy communication with policymakers, where face-to-face or direct communication, I would have said before COVID, face-to-face meetings is considered by far the most valuable, the most effective. Obviously, with COVID, that means, doing Zoom webinars, things like that, Zoom calls. A close second is a phone call. Then next in order would be a personalized letter or a personalized email. And the least effective is kind of mass communication, where you get an alert from the Sierra Club or the ACLU, and you just click a button and it sends a form message basically to your policymaker. Those aren't very effective because policymakers know that they don't take any effort on your part. You may not even realize what's in the message, things like that. So I think when you're trying to influence policy, I mean, if it's an agency, you need actually to participate in the proceeding, ideally, but most importantly, you need to communicate one-on-one with decision makers. And in the legislature, the same, and especially if you're talking about federal policy, where in Washington, D.C., I'm younger than the average member of Congress, actually by a lot. And I'm younger than the average cabinet secretary or deputy or undersecretary. I guarantee they're not swayed by social media unless you can generate something that triggers millions and millions of reactions. But even then, I think the more individualized contact, the more direct contact is really, really critical to affect policy, which is not to say don't do social media, because I think it's huge value from an education, public education and organizing standpoint, but not to influence the actual policy decision makers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you know, I feel like you have to do both. And I think that Julie and I have both been decision makers in government before. And I used to receive, you know, like thousands of form comment letters in part of the regulatory proceedings that I ran. And, you know, you file those all under one thing. So, you know, they don't have as much effect as individual tailored letters from various organizations or in-person meetings from various organizations. And social media is primarily, as Julia said, about communication and awareness building across those that you're trying to convince to take action, right? Or to think in a way that's similar to you. So it's almost before your true engagement with legislative leaders or regulatory leaders. You have to build the base of support through social media and raise awareness through social media. And then you need to take key leaders from that base of support and have them go and have one-on-one meetings with these leaders to actually change their mind. You know, and unless you're so, it's such a big issue that they know you're going to vote based on it, right? Which I'd say a lot of environmental groups do a pretty good job with social media to, you know, raise awareness. And then they take their sort of scorecards to the legislators and they say, if you don't do what we want on this bill, we're going to call you out on it. And then we're going to tell all of our members to vote you out, right? And so that's a way that social media can be used that I think is sort of effective with electeds, but it's more of a negative thing. It's you get rid of the people you don't like that way, rather than convince people you do like to do something specific. Because, I mean, this stuff is complicated, right? And social media is not the best platform for expressing really complicated policy positions, whereas individual comment letters and in-person meetings lets you get a little bit more in the nuance and lets you actually, you know, change in a deeper way what's actually happening.
Great. Thanks so much for that, guys. I totally agree with that. I think something fortunate is that we're able to have like 7 of these sessions. So we have been able to touch on reaching out to policymakers. So in past sessions, we've been able to look at like writing letters to your elected officials and writing op-eds and stuff like that. So I think in the end, one of the main takeaways is like to do as much as you can on as many outlets as you can. With that being said, I also think a big part is like social media could maybe be more like they said, raising awareness and maybe reaching out to businesses where there's also the other aspect of like policy change and like the detailed and individualized letters. So I think the Q&A session went really well. So we are, and like it was super detailed. So we're a little bit shorter on time. So I think we're gonna break for about 6-7 minutes. So people can kind of do these things. Like it could either be, like we said, the social media aspect or the policy aspect. Just like who you think you want to reach out to and what do you think they can do better. So I think we'll come back and like at like the 54, 55 and share.
I just want to mention before we break, because sometimes we lose people during this time. So I just want to throw in there, and I mentioned it kind of randomly earlier, but we have volunteer reflection surveys now. So I would really appreciate it, and so would LA Works, if we could hear your opinions and you know, what you thought of these events and these meetings, because that way the people that are organizing these things can really reflect on what they can learn from these opportunities. So it would really be awesome if you can take a few minutes whenever you can, after or now during the break if you want. But if you can just take these surveys and throw in some of your authentic ideas about how do you feel about these things, so that we can all learn and grow from this. So thanks.
Definitely. Yeah, so we'll break and I will see you guys again soon. Okay, I know that was short, but we are short on time. So if people want to bring it back in, to share what they come up with, that would be awesome.
Sarah, do you want Sam and me for this part?
Yeah, you're totally welcome. It's no worries. It's honestly whatever you want to do. I feel like people are coming back still.
Sarah, while everyone gathers, can I just ask, I mean, do folks feel like there's enough available from the renewable natural gas community to be effective in communicating about it on social media? I mean, we do struggle with this, and we try and make some infographics and other things, out there so people can use them if they want to. But we're not experts at it. So, I'd be interested in your guys' reaction to that. Like, have you ever tried to post about renewable gas and been like, wait, I don't even know how to explain this stuff?
Sam, I post stuff all the time online, but whenever I post a picture of myself, I get likes. But whenever I post content, I happen to not get anybody to like anything or share anything. Once in a while, I get 1 or 2 persons to share stuff. And I don't have that many people and not that many friends, maybe like under 700, but still under 700. And I'm not even getting any kind of shares or anything. So I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but whenever I post a picture of a dog, it gets a lot of likes. Whenever I post a picture of myself in the picture, I get a lot of likes. But yeah, people are not interested.
Yeah, I mean, we've totally experienced that because like folks post about, really cool looking electric cars or even sometimes cool looking heat pumps or something. Everyone gets excited because it looks futuristic, but no one gets very excited about a picture of a waste pile or something, That's just the nature of it, but it's still important. So we're trying to work on that and figure out ways to still explain it's important.
I totally get that. I also feel sometimes people use social media as an outlet for like happy things, and then this can sometimes be grim. So I think one of the main things is just like keep doing it and like, harp on people and they might find it annoying, but don't let up, right? I feel like that's what we see like with Julia and Sam, like they've been doing this for like 25 years plus and like they haven't let up on it.
I like the suggestion to include pictures of dogs with the info. That certainly grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
Although I like Sam's "I love you, Daddy" message in the background. That's sweet too.
Thanks. And a little bit of kid artwork, some cute little kids help too.
Great.
All right. So does anyone want to share anything? Otherwise. Okay then. Well, we are basically done. So I just want to thank all of you guys for coming. I think this was a super great session. Sorry if you hear those dings. Anyway, this is the second to last session. So, I'm sorry, texts keep coming up, so I'm getting distracted. But we have one more session in 2 weeks, so we hope to see you all there. It will be the last one. Please fill out the survey, let us know your thoughts, what we can do better, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarah, for organizing this.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.